Hey, what's going on, everyone? Tyler Dunn here with Jim Monis for another episode of the Go Long podcast, brought to you by Hamburg Brewing Company. Just stopped in, Jim. We're going remote again because you drove all over the country today. So hey, duty calls, family, emergency. I've been there. I know what you're going through right now. So loaded up, made a run, got some Just Saying, got some Louis, got some Lakeview Lager. Can't go wrong with Lakeview this time of year. But it was jam-packed. It was good to see. That place was full. A lot of people drinking, a lot of people having a good time. That's how it should be in America, right?
Lakeview Lager it's a staple, right? I mean, so I feel like every time I go to somebody's house for something this year, they have that somewhere, in their fridge. It's the best.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do miss being there though, Tyler. I can't wait to get back.
Well, we're going to be there, and we're going to definitely let everybody know the details as we get closer. But tentatively, we're thinking about a big-ass kickoff, in-person extravaganza the Saturday before the NFL season officially begins. So that's just us kind of, blabbing here. But we'll have more at golongtd.com for subscribers only, I think, Jim. But we'll see. We'll see. We're going to put it together and let everybody know. But without further ado, we've got the esteemed Matthew Coller here with us, a Purple Insider. People might not know this or listen to the podcast. We probably mentioned it here or there. But Matt, it isn't just behind the scenes helping this podcast sound good. If it sounds good, it's probably because of Matt. If it sounds bad, it's probably because I messed up the audio. But there's times when I just send it to him. He cleans it all up. He makes it sound good just out of the kindness of his heart because he's just an awesome, awesome dude. People here in Western New York probably remember him from WGR. People in Minneapolis know for his fantastic Vikings coverage at Purple Insider. And everybody knows him for the incredible guitar riff that is our intro at the Go Along podcast. So the man can do it all. Welcome, Matthew Coller.
I'm now realizing that I should have been billing you these hours for the intro and for all the audio fixes. If people don't realize, it is a little dicey, and I spent many a year as a radio producer there at WGR 550. So I have mastered the ways of fixing all of your audio mistakes. And so it takes the best part. Like a magic trick for kids where it's a very simple trick, but they go, wow, look at that. That's like you with the audio stuff. I'm like, all I have to do is push like 2 buttons, but then you get it back. Like, I can't believe it. You fixed it. What a genius. Like, okay, I'll let him think that.
It's just a different language to me. I feel like I'm back in, I took a French class at Syracuse because he had to take 2 languages at Newhouse for some reason that weren't English. And it was a French class taught to me by a teacher from Russia who with broken English. And so when I'm trying to put this audio together, that's how it kind of feel. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Sometimes all I know is it sounds like shit once in a while. I feel like I did everything right. We went through the bad audio equipment at first. I got to say, I got all that fancy schmancy equipment on Amazon. Couldn't figure it out. So this very simple Bumblebee mic that you recommended is bringing it home. So thank you.
Well, can I also give you an audio tip? Don't put the beer down too hard next to the microphone.
You mean like this?
Already like 3 times you've done that, and that's not great. So I'm still helping you out, even though I'm the guest on your podcast.
We want it to be authentic, though. It's got to be real.
That's right. People can hear the beer. And by the way, since you're pumping me up, I should pump up Jim a little bit because he gave me a hand with an article earlier this year where I kind of threw it out there. I said, what if there was terms that GMs and front offices could have, and I couldn't have asked for better insight from you, Jim, which I thought it was a really interesting discussion. So people can see that at my website, Purple Insider. But I greatly appreciated that because you gave some awesome insight.
Oh, you're welcome, Matt. I was going to bring it up, but you brought it up first. But that had me thinking for a couple days. I really did, and I still don't even know how I feel about that question, but I thought it was a great question and a great topic. So that was fun.
Well, let me ask you your opinion, Tyler, because I don't think we discussed it. The basis for the article was like the Vikings are kind of a little panicky right now. And I made a comment to you, Jim, before we went on here, just like what happens when a team just tries to rebuild in 1 year by signing everyone. I mean, it says that they're panicking. And I wonder if teams signed their general managers to terms like a politician, and then had to decide at the end of the term, rather than going year to year and going, yeah, I know we extended you, but you're also fired. And they had time to always see the bigger picture, how much different decision-making would be. And I think I got Jim to admit it would be quite a bit different, but he also still wanted to fire people.
I just can't. People need to be held accountable somehow, somewhere. There's horrible decisions that are made that I think can affect that season, for that year. And if you had a part in, hurting your team, you should be fired. I mean, that's the business. Because a lot of people get fired not based on performance, based on relationships. So, I'm all for people getting fired by performance, because I'm here with you guys because I didn't have a relationship with the coach. So it's a tough one, though. It is a great topic.
It is. Well, Matt, tell everybody where they can find the story.
Yeah, purpleinsider.substack.com. You have to scroll down a little bit because it was a little earlier in the off season, but a lot of really interesting thoughts from you, Jim. And that was the funniest part to me, is that you were talking about how, like, yes, they probably would make smarter decisions because they weren't under the gun all the time. But this one guy made this one decision and he deserved it. I think you went back. Now, actually, really interesting, because I forget when we talked, but it might have been before the draft. And so we were talking about Chicago and Mitch Trubisky. Like, oh, you messed up the Trubisky thing. That's on you. The other two quarterbacks became stars. And yet now, if Justin Fields, which was very much in my mind the right decision, if he works out, then everyone gets to be a genius again. And they'll say, thank God we didn't fire that guy because of Trubisky, right?
It is true. And that was the hard part of this topic. Like, do you get a chance? Jason Light in Tampa took Jameis Winston. Now, not that he was a complete failure as a quarterback, but he was not the answer. He was not the number one pick. He wasn't going to save the franchise. They go out and get Tom Brady, which every fifth grader would have tried to do too. And now he's celebrating on boats. So, I mean, it really is crazy. I mean, but yes, I do like seeing guys get another chance, especially if you notice they're drafting well at every other position. Hey, you miss on a quarterback, yeah, it can hurt you, but you've done so many other things well, you get another chance. And, we'll see if Pace and those guys get it right now in Chicago. But
well, that should be said about Tampa Bay too, is that they drafted exceptionally well.
Very well.
And I respected their strategy of every time you get into the third round, you just start picking corners, just because it seemed to be a hot zone for them. But they landed a bunch of really good draft picks that helped them build that team. And as great as Tom Brady was, like, they had a complete team, and they lucked it. And this is the other thing too, and this is where you can never separate it, is just the luck element. I mean, the Vikings, for example, they draft the right quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater. They didn't pick Johnny Manziel, right? So they get Teddy Bridgewater. He looks like he's about to ascend to a franchise quarterback while the roster is peaking, which is the dream for everybody. And then his knee collapses. And then they're chasing, and it's trade for Bradford, and then sign Kirk Cousins and all that. And all of it happens just because of something that was completely out of their control. And that's the hard thing to factor. It's like Tampa Bay's next 5 drafts could be horrible. Like, we don't know, right? Like, they may have just lucked into it, or they may be really smart. It's so hard to say because everything's in a small sample, and you need it to come together to actually win.
And I think this is going to be a theme for this episode too, that we'll get into ownership. Some owners get panicked and want to just fire everybody, change everything, move on. Some owners just kind of want to be patient and take it to the extreme, to the point of maybe being complacent, maybe being too patient. And I can't wait to get into this with you, man. I mean, where the Vikings are at now compared to maybe where they were a year ago. It's so fascinating. But just so everybody knows, we're going to be taking a look at a division every episode up to the start of training camp with the smartest people that cover the teams within that division. So we've got Matt on to talk some Vikings. We're going to have Dan Wiederer on to talk some Bears. He's with the Chicago Tribune. He'll be joining us later on in the show, hopefully. And we probably talk about the Packers way too much anyway, so we'll sprinkle them in if there's a criticism of this podcast, Matt, and it's absolutely justified, it's that we've just been talking way too much Aaron Rodgers all off season. So we're gonna put a pin in that. You know?
See, no. This is the rule of radio, is that you play the hits, man. I mean,
I play the hits too much, though.
Come on.
I mean, that's some self-awareness.
You can, it's because it's a Vikings podcast. There's 2 episodes a week dedicated to Aaron Rodgers on our show because it's just the most interesting thing going.
It is. I mean, nothing even comes close. It is the number one storyline in sports. You know, no doubt about it.
I think we're safe tonight. We're doing the NFC Central, so we have to talk about them.
Oh, now, the NFC Central. Remember the NFC Central?
I'm not the Central, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but wasn't that great though with Tampa Bay in it?
Oh man, Mike Allstott.
It's always going to be that for me. It's always going to be that for me. But if we talk AFC East and we're still bringing up Rodgers, we got issues.
All right, so Vikings, Matt. I went on your podcast, which is phenomenal. I mean, if there's a Viking fan out there that doesn't listen to it, they should. And you really crank those episodes out too. But when I think that was back in December, right after I launched Go Long, and we had the 2-part series on the Vikings and Zimmer, and are they going to break through? I mean, this is a coach that pretty old school, pretty hard driving, not for everyone, and they kind of ran its course. They went through a lot of those veterans. Those veterans left, including Stephon Diggs, kind of ran out their best player. Didn't really want to work with him, but they kind of had a whole new wave of young players on defense coming through, and they kind of knew there'd be these growing pains. They stuck with Kirk Cousins. They drafted Justin Jefferson. They gave Dalvin Cook that contract. At the time, it seemed like this team that was in this weird, this weird spot where they were convincing themselves they're contenders when they really weren't. And they're paying a lot of guys, but they're still going young. It was kind of an identity crisis, I thought, with a coach that, maybe owners were sticking with him a little too long, him and Rick Spielman. But here they are, right? I mean, I feel like they're in a good spot, at this point. And some of the people I talked to for that story, Matt, like I checked in with, and they're like, they're looking pretty good. Like, there should be optimism with that roster. They do have a good mix of young and old, and you bring in a Patrick Peterson, that's going to have an effect even beyond the field. But maybe it has a lot to do with Aaron Rodgers' uncertainty. Maybe that's a factor in the optimism, but are fans in a good spot? Are they expecting this team to compete for a Super Bowl? Because, hey, that's how they've kind of conducted themselves with their team building.
I think you have to, or this is it, or there's going to be changes, because if you look at what they did with the salary cap, this is a team that is brilliant with the salary cap to begin with. But I was once playing in a, Vikings, what do you call it? Like a charity golf tournament. And I was with their cap guy. And I said, what do you think when people say the cap's a myth? And he said, it's only a myth because ownership gives me the money. And that's exactly what has gone on this offseason, is when you can put void years and stuff in these contracts. It's like, yeah, you can get the guys here now and you could pay them now, but you've pushed all your chips to the middle of the table. When you spend too much money on Delvin Tomlinson, you spend too much money on Patrick Peterson, you spent all this cash to rebuild the defense now, a lot of 1-year contracts. This is not like, oh, we're signing long-term players here. And even reworking Danielle Hunter's contract instead of playing hardball with him to put more cash in his pocket. It all says this is kind of it for you, because Kirk Cousins is carrying a $45 million contract or cap hit next year. That's not going to happen. It's either going to be an extension or it's going to be he's traded probably because they can't cut him just because of the way the situation is. So it's either, and then plus someone will trade for him, and they'll trade for Carson Wentz. They'll trade for Kirk Cousins. So it's either a trade and they really rebuild it and they fire Zimmer and all that sort of stuff if this doesn't go well, or it's stay the course because they had a great season and they proved that all Zimmer needed was a little bit of the talent back after everything had gone sideways last year. But Zimmer has had a long time here, and it's been mostly outside of 1 year somewhere in the middle. And you have to respect the fact that it never goes down. It's like Mike Tomlin. It never goes down into the dumps, even when he's had quarterbacks hurt and all sorts of drama and fired offensive coordinators and all sorts of things. And yet the worst record he's had here is still 7-9, which I think says a lot about him as a head coach. At the same time, the best record outside of 1 year where Aaron Rodgers got hurt, by the way, outside of that 1 year, the best record is only 10-6. So, or 11-5, and you won a division, but it's not like year after year, you're pushing the envelope to win the Super Bowl, especially since Kirk Cousins got here. And I think that some of Zimmer's things that maybe were sort of quaint at one time grow old, right? Like you said, the old school football coach, the guy who wants to run first and play defense and those sorts of things. And somehow you end up 27th in the league in pass attempts, despite going 7-9, which just doesn't really add up, right? And having Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, which again, just doesn't really add up. So I think that there's a ton of pressure from ownership and fans, that the fans have sort of seen this movie before, and ownership is saying, look, we gave you all of the things that you could have ever wanted as a defensive coach here. We brought back Hunter. We kept Anthony Barr around when you could have gotten rid of him. We gave you an all-pro corner in free agency, even if he's coming off not a great year. Like, go do it, man. And that's what makes this year super interesting for the Vikings. I mean, beyond the fact that, if Rodgers doesn't play, they've got a chance to go somewhere. But I think it's like, we gave you everything you want. And now I think it's fair to say, hot seat, pressure, whatever words you want to use. Last year, it would have been unfair. They had to redo that whole thing. Guys got old. That would have been unfair. But now I think it's fair.
I agree with this 100% with Matt. I do think that there's pressure on Zimmer this year for sure. Well, every coach really, but for them to be that bad on defense last year, and granted, the circumstances were what they were, like you explained, that can't happen again this year. This team is set up to possibly win this division. They really can. You have two teams that aren't very good in this division. The Bears and Lions are going to struggle, I think, this year. We don't know what's going to happen with Green Bay, that quarterback situation. But regardless, they're still a good team, whoever the quarterback's going to be. The Vikings have a chance in this division, I think. They have the 14th easiest strength of schedule this year. Now, that's not crazy, right? That's middle of the pack. But the rest of the division, the Packers are 21st, Bears are 22nd, Lions are 29th strength of schedule. So the Vikings have an advantage. They have an easier schedule than the rest of their division. There's no way I think Zimmer has that bad of a defense again. I do respect him as a defensive coach. I don't know about head coach. I know his personality is what it is, but he's had a lot of success over the years. You have to respect it. And then you would have to think they bounce back a little bit. They had some good takeaways last year as a team. They took the ball away. They just didn't, keep the ball from other teams. The margin wasn't great, but defensively they made some turnovers. So I just feel like this is their year. And if it's bad, that defense is bad again, that's all coming down on Zimmer.
Yeah. And, last year was sort of funky the way that it worked out, because the defense was not so terrible early in the season that they couldn't have survived, but the quarterback play was. And this is what's so difficult to separate with Zimmer, because if you look at a lot of coaches who succeed, what is it that makes them a genius, right? Like Josh Allen is great all of a sudden, and oh my gosh, Sean McDermott. Now, Sean McDermott's always been a good defensive coach. I don't doubt that he knows what he's doing. It's just you become a lot smarter when all of a sudden your quarterback's one of the best in the league. And Zimmer's never had that. I mean, you start off with a young Bridgewater who's just getting his feet wet in the league. He wins a division, kind of playing traffic cop and handing off to Adrian Peterson a lot, and then just having to do what he had to do. And then he's about ready to make the franchise his, and he gets hurt. You go to Bradford, who shows up and has to start 12 days or something after he got here, an impossible task. The whole team gets hurt that year. You have a pop-up year from Keenum, which goes in the sort of annals of all-time great journeyman pop-up seasons, right? Like when Kerry Collins went 13-3 for the Titans, just like super random. And they all knew they couldn't stick with this. And so then it was, okay, how do we get Zimmer his quarterback, his guy, his franchise quarterback that could take this great roster to the next level? And they went with Cousins, and it has not worked out. And fans debate this constantly. They look at his quarterback rating and his PFF grades, and they say, well, he's been good. And like, that's kind of part of it though, is he's been good and he hasn't gotten you anywhere. So you didn't make the right decision, or at least up until now. So then you extend him because he wins a single playoff game as the 6th seed on the road, kind of a random thing. You won a coin toss. He earned that. Of course, I'm not taking it away from him. It's just, if you told them in 2018, 3 years, you'd have a 25, 22-1 record and 19-21-1, not against the Lions, by the way. And you'd have one playoff win as the 6th seed. That's not what you signed up for. So in a way, you feel like Zimmer has sort of, outside of last year, done his job. Their defense in 2019 and 2018 was good enough to get you into the playoffs and deep into the playoffs. And the guy that they paid all the money to take them to the next level as a quarterback has not been able to do that. And it's one of those rare situations, Jim, that, we try to talk about how we evaluate it: scouting, eye test, this stat, that stat. And I'm a huge fan of analytics. This one comes down to one, and it's wins. When you pay somebody that much to show up on a really good team and in a very stable franchise with a good coach, it's wins. And they have lost a lot of games just basically on Kirk Cousins throwing them away. And so from that perspective, I'm not saying I feel bad for Zimmer. He's well compensated for this, and he's gotten a lot of patience from ownership. But when your future rests on Kirk Cousins, I think that probably made Jay Gruden pretty ornery at times in Washington. And I think that it's probably the thing Mike Zimmer is most nervous about, because I'm confident his defense will be a lot better, but I'm not confident that a Tiger changes his stripes when it comes to Kirk Cousins.
You know what's crazy though is when I was working on that story, looking back at the pivotal moment, right, is after they get to the NFC Championship game with freaking Case Keenum, at quarterback. They go out, they get Kirk Cousins. This offense is supposed to be paired with that defense. Boom, perfect. Kirk Cousins was really good the first half of that season. His numbers historically were unbelievable. God, I forget what the stat was. He's like one of the only quarterbacks ever to have a certain amount of yards, touchdowns, picks, passer rating. I wish it was at the tip of my tongue, but John DeFilippo, granted, he wasn't running the ball much. They're throwing it all over the place, but they lost a couple close games and the numbers were good. Things were what you wanted out of him at that point. And then that's when Mike Zimmer stepped in and said, absolutely not on my watch. This offense isn't going to be that. So can they win the way Mike Zimmer wants to win on offense? That's what it comes down to, right? Because they're not just going to all of a sudden start throwing the ball 40 times a game, even with Justin Jefferson, even with Adam Thielen, Irv Smith. I love their draft too. I mean, to go out and get guys like Kene Nwangu and Amir Smith-Marset, those are outside the box type of draft picks. Those are projections. Those are not typical Viking, offensive minded draft picks. Love all the weapons they have, but how does it fit into that turn that we saw mid-season where Mike Zimmer fired his OC because there was too much passing? He wanted to run the ball. Can you win this way?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever had this, but sometimes in a relationship, somebody does something that you just never forget. And that with Zimmer would be the thing that you never forget, is they were winning and they destroyed the New York Jets in a game. And Zimmer was frustrated that they didn't run enough, which I would have agreed with him because it was windy there and Cousins wasn't playing well. And actually Todd Bowles, I think, is a smart guy. And he was the head coach of the Jets, I think, at that point. And he really kind of messed with Cousins' mind in that game. He was the first guy, and this is part of it too. He was the first guy to just double Thielen and Diggs on every big situation. And Cousins had no answer with personnel, and also just it's Cousins. So he kind of freezes up when the answers aren't right there for him. And I think Todd Bowles was the first one to start messing with him. And Zimmer saw that. And Zimmer said, no. I'm not dealing with that against better teams. I need you to run the ball more. And that just wasn't John DeFilippo's thing. That you can paint John DeFilippo in a bunch of different ways. I mean, he was, I think, the victim in a way of Zimmer trying to step in and sort of just take the reins away and say, sorry, I'm not letting you do that. You drove my car too fast. I'm taking the keys. At the same time, his running game was not good. It was like he had never thought of the run before. And I think when you look at some of these offenses, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Gary Kubiak, a lot of it starts there and they're very successful on the ground. And then everything plays off of that. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's run first. It just means you really got to think about it if you're the defense, and your linebackers have to crash and things like that. And that just, the play action percentage for Cousins that year was very low. And this is a guy who was coming from McVay and Shanahan. He had his success and made his bones in that play action, wide zone type of offense. And then now you're spreading it out. Now you're putting it all on Cousins. And the thing about Cousins is no matter how much you try to protect him, he will take sacks. He will throw interceptions. He will get strip sacked. Like, these are features of Kirk Cousins, not like a random
Yeah.
thing that happened that year. And Mike Zimmer, one of his sort of, philosophies, which is fair, is like not turning the ball over. Right. But you saw last year, you mentioned this, Jim, that they tried so hard to run the ball all the time and we're not going to turn it over. They turned it over a lot anyway. And right. And Cousins led the league in interceptions by week 6. And that's why it's like, you can't point the finger at one guy or the other, but you can say that this has always been an uncomfortable combination. You have a head coach, especially who loved Teddy Bridgewater and loved Sam Bradford, but has never really had that same way of talking about Kirk Cousins. I don't think that they gel. I also think that a lot of people would love to see, like, what if they did open it up and throw more often? And Mike Zimmer is like, nah, I don't trust the guy. That's the impression I get anyway. I mean, I don't want to speak for him exactly, but it just feels like I only trust him to a point to throw certain types of passes in certain types of situations, but I don't trust him to lead the offense without turning the ball over. And I think in a lot of ways, Cousins has earned that. So it's like you sort of swing back and forth between, well, yeah, I would like to see him lean into Kirk and throw more often because of their weapons, but he did lead the league in interceptions last year, even when they tried to protect him. And so you sort of volley back and forth, like, whose fault is this, right?
Well, even, and sorry, Jim, I promise we'll let you
okay.
talk too. Like I just found that stat, and oh my God, like even after a training camp of Zimmer yelling at the offensive staff, what the hell are we doing out there? Like, he hated the RPO stuff, which is what eliminated them in the NFC Championship game with Nick Foles in Philly. Like, he couldn't stand seeing that. He has the script in his hand. He's calling defensive plays just to screw with the offense, like not really letting them get into any sort of rhythm. None of that. Even with all of that, they started that season 5-3-1, and it could have been a hell of a lot better. They had terrible kicking. Like, they missed a ton of like field goals, extra points. Everson Griffin before that Bills game. I mean, the Bills probably still beat them, but that was a scary incident. I got to tell you, Matt, but like, buildings on lockdown, players are on edge, concerned. So you had to deal with that. Zimmer's defense gives up 556 yards to the Rams in prime time. And the stat, Kirk Cousins for the season, the first quarterback ever to throw for 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks or less while completing 70% of his passes. So Adam Thielen had 100 yards in 8 straight games. Stephon Diggs, happy. Things really, really good on offense. And Zimmer said, no, none of this. So I'm just so fascinated by it because he won, right? He's the head coach. He got the OC out of there. They're running the ball more. Cousins they're trying to do whatever they want with them. And I guess we'll see what I just wonder, at some point, are they just going to have to say, screw it, start throwing the ball all over the place with these weapons we have? Not happening. You're shaking your head.
No, it's not going to happen. The interesting thing about Kirk Cousins and all of his stats, though, and I would love your perspective on this, Jim, as a scouting man, because stats that, there's all sorts of different sayings about, like, stats are like a lamp pole or something. I don't know if you ever heard that one, but I forget how that goes. Stats can lie to you, or you can whatever, twist them in any way you want. I think you just need a microscope to see the issues with Kirk Cousins. You need to look at game by game. His big games are super big. I mean, look at how he's done against the Detroit Lions. Nobody has ever slaughtered another team the way Cousins has with the Lions. And you earn those wins and you make those passes and you played that game. But the game against Buffalo is a great example. That happens kind of often when he faces a team that has a decent pass rusher or two, and it's a strip sack. It's an interception on the first drive against Atlanta. I mean, I'm sure you can do this with a lot of quarterbacks, but he, I think, is the most that I've ever seen where the ups are very high and the lows are so low, and they usually get split down the middle of how they go during that season. So you talk about, John DeFilippo. Well, they go out to Seattle with a chance to really change the face of that season. And in the first drive, Cousins is so anxious, he turns around and throws a pass. You guys can go look at this, the all 22 film. It's wild. He has Adam Thielen wide open on a slant, which I assumed, or it looked like, was kind of his read, but he dropped his eyes, then didn't know what to do, then turned around and threw a pass overhand backwards to his running back. And Latavius Murray, by the grace of God, grabbed it, almost like if you drop something off a table and reach out and snatch it, like, Why do I have this in my hand? That was Latavius Murray. So throughout that season and throughout the time of Kirk Cousins being here, game to game, you kind of don't really know what you're going to get. And there are moments where you just go, I don't know how that happened. I don't know what was going on there. And I don't know why, you know what I mean? Like this. And the same thing happened, against Chicago when they lost in the final game of the season. Chicago in 2018, they benched their starters in the second half of the game. And Cousins, by the end of the game, is fighting with Adam Thielen on the sideline. It's like, you really do have to look far beyond just that big number, the quarterback rating or the PFF grade. I wonder how, Jim, you manage that.
Well, we looked at Kirk Cousins, say it was 2015 or 16. I can't remember. It might have been 16, whenever in that range, when obviously he went to Minnesota. But everything you're saying right now is everything we talked about when he played for Washington. I think it's just him. He drives you crazy because he's a good quarterback. He is. He's a good quarterback. But he doesn't get it done consistently enough. He ends up hurting his team too often, and you can't do that as the franchise quarterback. You can't be the reason your team's losing. So if they get their defense right this year, if they get it fixed, and that Dalvin Cook is a special player, they're not winning 10 games, 11 games this year with a good defense and Cook at running back healthy, Cousins is the problem. Like, there should be no reason they aren't winning 10 games this year. And it comes down to Cousins, but he is crazy to watch. Just like you said, I watch all these guys every week, and I'm sitting there doing, my little charts, and I'm shaking my head every week. I'm laughing. I'm like coming out of this saying, Kirk Cousins is like a top 11, 12 quarterback in my rankings. I'm like, I wouldn't want him ever on my team, but yet I'm telling you, he really does make some special throws. He comes up with plays that are just, the guy looks like a franchise quarterback, but then the head scratchers are always there. What about the big games? That's always been known with him. What about that Washington season when all they had to do was win that last game of the season to get in the playoffs? Couldn't do it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I think it's all there in front of us to say, buyer beware.
Well, and you talk about like the things where you kind of go, what happened there? I mean, his sack rate is incredibly high. And I think when you watch it, he holds onto the ball too long. A lot of times he will get pressure and decide, well, it's probably better. Well, I'm saying he decides it's probably better, but he also does not have any athleticism to do anything. And that's what, like, the margin is really thin between your Derek Carrs and Jared Goffs and Jimmy Garoppolo's and Kirk Cousins. But the margin between Cousins, who's maybe let's say he's your 8th to 11th best quarterback, and the best quarterback is massive. It's like a whole, 1,000-yard difference. And that's one of the biggest things is Cousins, throw for throw, you put him up against anybody, but he won't create on his own. He won't find a way, like Case Keenum was a find a way type of guy who would just throw it up to Stephon Diggs and maybe magic happens. And guess what? One time it did. Cousins doesn't make the throws like that. Cousins can't escape. He takes a lot of sacks. He takes that extra half a second to process sometimes. And defenses that are good understand how to take advantage of this. Defenses like the Detroit Lions that play single high man coverage all the time get annihilated by Adam Thielen constantly, right? Like this is the crazy thing. So I ran this last year. I looked at every game by Kirk Cousins as a Viking against defenses that finished in the top 10 in quarterback rating allowed. And he won 0 games against them as a Minnesota Viking. And that's been the story is if you were a gambler and you bet against Kirk against a good defense every time you bet against him, you would win. If you bet for him every bad defense, you would win. And I think it's just because of these margins of things that are around the edges where you have to give him the fact that he's an excellent overall quarterback. It's just when you say the difference between being a 9 or 10 win quarterback and being a Super Bowl quarterback or a consistent contender, we can find those differences. And if Kirk Cousins was only paid $10 million, you would say, well, you could build a great roster and make up for some of those problems and maybe you can win, right? They did it with Jared Goff and Jimmy Garoppolo, but he's paid $30 million. And it all comes back to that because you look at the Vikings roster even now, They had to do cap gymnastics to make it work. They had to sign him to an extension to even lower his cap hit a little to sign some people last year. And they still don't have depth at a lot of positions. If Justin Jefferson gets an ingrown toenail, it's Chad Beebe who's playing as your starting wide
Easy
receiver,
now.
right?
This is a BB friendly podcast.
Hey, Chad Beebe is a great story of someone who has no business being in the NFL and has worked his butt off and does a couple of things really well. He's not a number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. He's just not. Like, he could play in the league, but he's not a number 3 that you could count on to fill in for Justin Jefferson. So that's kind of how it all ties together right there. Is it actually all does come back to the money.
And it comes back to the human element. You know what I mean? Like, I know you love analytics. And Jim, you love analytics too, but I feel like we're a very human podcast.
I like both. I think you have to do both. I think
you do. It's a combination, but like, that's what people say about Kirk Cousins again and again and again. Like, there is a reason that he was, I don't know what it is now, but after he was all jacked up when he beat Chicago, right, on Monday Night Football. Remember him fist pumping after getting the first down? He's going nuts. I think that made him like 1-9 on Monday Night Football. And there's a reason for that. People like to mock that and, QB wins with the Z. Like, how dare you? No, there is something to the lights being bright and it being 3rd and 8, and you get skittish and you make a play like you referenced there when you're throwing it underhand or whatever it was to Latavius Murray. Like,
oh no, it was overhand, backward.
Yeah. It's a theme with Kirk Cousins. So that's what worries you. That's what really worries you when you're paying him $30 million. And that's something that just isn't going to change. Every one of his ex-coaches described him as really tight, really nervous. It's not a secret. Is that somebody that's going to win 3-4 playoff games in a row? No.
Well, and that's exactly the tough thing about it, because he is talented enough and they do have the talent around him. Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson are all in the top 10, and in Cook's case, top 3 at their position. And so you never want to say, oh, he's not going to be able to do it when you have players around you that are that good, because these types of players, Diggs, Thielen, Cook, they went to the NFC Championship game with Case Keenum. And I don't think there's any question that Cousins is more talented than Case Keenum.
Are the balls brass enough though, Matt?
But that's exactly it. I mean, can you go? Somebody asked me today, if I do a little mailbag, they said, do you think that the Vikings, even if they were mediocre, could do like an 07 Giants and, just surprise everybody and run through the playoffs? Like, do you mean Eli beating Tony Romo in Dallas when they were 13-3, Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau when they were 13-3, and 17-0 Tom Brady? Do I think
Brett Favre at Lambeau?
Oh, that's right. Brett Favre.
Both of them, but yeah, that year.
But Kirk Cousins has, I believe, 4 wins against winning teams since he got here. It's just not something that you have any evidence to argue for. And you mentioned the human part of it. And I think it's just, he's never been a guy like Ben Roethlisberger, no matter how washed Ben Roethlisberger is. The guys who play with him are just always going to believe Ben Roethlisberger can find it. It was probably like the 2015 Broncos where they're like, yeah, wow, are those passes coming out bad? But you know what? And in the end of the day, Manning did just enough in those playoff games. It's like, there's just not that belief from the people in the locker room in him. And I think where you see it the most is when something goes wrong and the body language of the players. It's fun. It's actually fun to watch. You know this, Jim, on all 22. You kind of go back and you're like, wait, what was he doing after that play? This guy's throwing his arms up. This guy's hanging his head, walking to the sideline. And it's become my second sport, is watching body language when things go wrong. But you really see it. You really see it. And even like Jefferson, he was caught on, maybe you guys saw this, like the microphones where he was like, throw the bleeping ball, Kirk. And of course they downplayed it and everything else. But there is a theme of receivers being like, come on, Kirk. And, Diggs and Kirk got along well. I know that, but you got to know that when he was playing with Josh Allen, he's going, oh, this is when a guy will actually just throw it to me, when I'm covered or when he's on the move or whatever. So all of those things, believing in the guy who's leading your franchise, it's hard to believe that everyone will rally behind him to the point like they did with Eli Manning, to the point where they could go upset people in the playoffs. And so if you're going to do it, you have to be great in the regular season, and you have to get 14 great games out of Kirk, because it's going to be hard to believe that you can win 3-4 games in the playoffs to get there.
So Matt, you were talking about gambling a little bit, and if I could tell you over these last 3 years, how many times, if I bet on Kirk Cousins, I swear I will lose. And if I bet against him, I promise you I will lose. He has become my number one. It's to the point where I always talk to my friends, have a group of guys who always talk about your bets. Like, guys, I'm taking the Vikings. They're like, don't do it. You know it's going to get you somehow, some way. But then let me ask you this, Matt. Right now, their over-under for wins this year is 9. I like the over in that. I really think if that defense gets right, I think they get 10, 11 wins this year.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I'm basing that on the fact I do not think the Bears and Lions are going to be very good.
I have them at 10-7. When I did my little W's and L's next to the game, as we all do,
like it.
I have them at 10-7. You do have to write down an L in Soldier Field, because they're
going to have one, right?
They are haunted by Soldier Field.
Right.
It was stunning that they won last year, but that's a little bit of the problem, though, right? Is like they do all these things on defense, and they've got so much talent. They've got a lot of Pro Bowlers and star players, and yet Vegas says, meh, right? And so you, as a reporter, and you're kind of horse blinders, right? You're watching this one team and you're saying, wow, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going right for this offseason, and they've really nailed it. And I mean, I wouldn't take back the opinion that they did. I think that they did nail the offseason in terms of rebuilding the defense. But then you go, all right, let me pull myself out and put myself in the perspective of someone with money on this. And you go, well, what if this offensive line that they drafted guys to fix, what if Christian Darrisaw isn't ready for Myles Garrett? Right. What if he's not ready for TJ Watt? What if he's not ready for if Chandler Jones is playing? What if he's not ready? And then you start going through it and you go, wow, they face Cam Hayward this year. They face Aaron Donald this year. And those are the types of guys, Khalil Mack, Zadarius Smith, who have been really the biggest nemesis for Kirk Cousins, which is if you can pressure him, especially up the middle, then it's usually that's like the key to win. He lost to Matt Moore in Kansas City because Chris Jones took that game over. And that's kind of the MO for him, is if you can get that pressure on him, and he'll allow it, he'll bring it on himself. So they draft the offensive lineman. Great idea for 2022, 2023. This could be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, but can a rookie middle of the first round draft pick go up against Khalil Mack twice is my question. And I mean, that's just, it's hard to bet on that, right? I mean, because of the history of rookie offensive linemen, that they just don't perform at a high level right away. And so that's my big holdup for, could they be a 13-win team, a 14-win team? I don't know if I can get there with an offensive line that's so inexperienced, and how much that impacts the quarterback.
What about Kellen Mond? Like, I like the fact that the Vikings drafted a quarterback relatively high. It seemed like they were almost afraid to bring in competition for Kirk Cousins. They didn't want to hurt his feelings. Maybe he's a little, you know him better than me, but there might be a little fragile nature to him that they didn't want to mess with. I don't know, but they should have brought in competition a year or 2 years ago. Somebody, they bring in a young quarterback that's got some talent. I mean, I'm not going to say he's going to replace him, but there's somebody behind Kirk Cousins that at least makes you go, oh, let's see what he has.
This is what's always interesting about breaking down Kirk Cousins, is because he's definitely not mentally soft in every way. Like he's not going to be mistaken for General Patton, that's for sure. But I also think that he is really like a focused person. Like things from the outside surprisingly don't get to him. He'll have the worst game, and ESPN, NFL Network, everybody will just be ripping him. And then the next game, like you said, Jim, the next game he'll throw for 400 yards. And I don't think that's an extra motivated thing. I think it's just that he is very much kind of in his own bubble. And RG3 in that situation didn't keep him away from becoming a franchise quarterback. And all the things that have happened around here, all the criticism that he's gotten, and even, not necessarily having everyone even in their own franchise believe in him. I mean, Everson Griffin tweeted some things about Mike Zimmer not believing in Kirk or not ever wanting Kirk and things like that, which you can believe he's probably speaking from the heart there when he tweets that. And yet Kirk has just gone out and been Kirk like year after year. And I don't think that drafting Kellen Mond really makes any difference to Kirk at all. And especially when you watch Kellen Mond, I'm sure you've been through this, Jim, but when you watch Kellen Mond in minicamp, you're like, oh, okay, well, this guy has no idea what he's doing. So I don't think he's going to threaten Kirk Cousins right away. He doesn't even know how to take a snap under center. Well, that's the thing, is that the timelines don't cross, is that like they have to make a decision on Kirk after this year. If Kirk takes them to the NFC Championship game, he's the quarterback going forward. If Kirk goes 7 and 10, then he's not the quarterback anymore. And they'll make a trade like the Lions did to somebody, and they'll get a new quarterback. And that might be Mond, or it might not, depending on what they see. I don't think it will be like third round picks. I mean,
it's hard to make it as a quarterback in third
probably.
round.
I tend to now, Jim, I'm sure you could tell me a bunch of stories of NFL people who have no idea what they're talking about, but I tend to believe in the analysis of the NFL as a whole. If a guy is a first round pick, like his chances are just a lot better. If he's a third round pick, they're a lot worse than a first rounder. So the fact that the league looked at Kellen Mond, every team and all 32 said, not a first, not a second. That to me says he's not even a part of this conversation for me, for the future of the Vikings quarterback situation.
No, I don't disagree with you. I don't think they're ready for him yet. Just watching him in college, he looked far away from me. I think Chris Sims was hyped him up pretty hard. And it really made me want to watch him more and more. And I just didn't see it. I don't see the natural throwing, the accuracy, the release, the mechanics. I think obviously he's a good athlete. I don't know if he's special enough as a playmaker, as an athlete, to consider him like he's not Lamar, all those types of guys where he's going to make a living on his athleticism. So I think he's a ways away. And they did that though, because to get a guy like him is smart. If you do believe he can become a number 2, it's good to bring a guy like that in this year if Cousins does get hurt, because that messes with defenses a little bit, because they would, cater to his talents and what he can handle. So they might be able to do something different than what they do with Kirk Cousins, which can always throw a team off when you bring a backup in. But yeah, I think he's a ways away.
I think it was about them saying, Kirk, we might go with someone else someday, just so you know.
That's more so what I'm getting at. The idea of a threat at the position, but they just haven't done anything remotely close to this.
Yeah, and I think also that the lack of mobility, it's not like they don't watch the rest of football, right?
It's real, Matt. You nailed that. I mean, he's painful to watch in the pocket. I mean, they have to protect him, and it's too hard to do anymore.
So I'll give you a crazy stat on this one. So Teddy Bridgewater got hurt in 2016, right? And he came back as a backup for the Saints in 2018, and then didn't play really that year, played a little bit 2019, maybe like 5 games, and then started last year for Carolina, right? He has more rushing yards since 2018 than Kirk Cousins does. Like he's played like half the games of Cousins, and yet he has more rushing yards. It's like rushing doesn't necessarily win you games as a quarterback, as you know, but when you are the dead last, when you are the Drew Bledsoe basically of this era, like that ends up making a difference when everybody else has guys that can at least take off. Like even someone like Derek Carr can take off and get you like 20 yards in a run, and Kirk is just not capable of it. Or he can escape the pocket. That's the biggest thing, I think. Escape when you get interior pressure, you can make something happen still, and that's just not something Kirk can do. And I think that played into drafting Kellen Mond. Now, what's more interesting to me than the pick of Kellen Mond was the not pick of Mac Jones and the not legitimate trade offer for Justin Fields, because they tried to trade up for Justin Fields, but it was kind of like a half-hearted effort. It was a trade that clearly Carolina wasn't going to take. And then Mac Jones is on the board and you trade out of the pick. And what's funny about that is that Mac Jones, by his pro day numbers, is way more athletic than Kirk Cousins. But I still think they saw too much of Kirk Cousins and said, no, we don't want that. And then there's the other element of they knew they needed a left tackle. Like for now, for this year, So, well, we'll kind of half-heartedly try to trade up for the first round pick. And that other guy's too much like Kurt. And you hate to see it. We got a starting tackle. Like, guys, right? I mean, why am I drafting the quarterback for the future if I might not have a future?
Perfectly said.
It's an interesting team, guys. I mean, it's really
where does it
fascinating.
go? I mean, where does what's going to happen then? I hate to be throwing prediction requests at you, Matt, at this point, but we're going to do it right now. What's going to happen with the Vikings? What's going to happen in the NFC North? With Rodgers and without Rodgers.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say is give me I think I'll just throw my opinion out there. I think Rodgers plays for the Packers. And I think if he plays, that the Packers go 13-4 and the Vikings go 10-7, and then they have no idea what to do. Because if your team goes 10-7, they'll go like, oh, well, we made the 6 seed again or the 7 seed, and that's pretty good, right? But I think what a lot of fans will look at it as, and I would agree with this, is right, but you kind of been there, done that with that. And what you need to show, if you go, there's like 2 teams can go 10-7. And if the New York Jets go 10-7 this year, you go, oh my God, what a season for them. But if the Vikings do, you go, well, you were supposed to kind of be a little better than that. So I'm not really sure. Or how do we get to a next level with this much talent? Or did you kind of not make the most out of this talent? Or did your quarterback melt down in 5 of those 7 losses? Or right. So I think that the most difficult scenario for ownership is the one that's actually the most likely.
So we're thinking Super Bowl champs.
Well, I'm thinking 10-7. They maybe win a playoff game, maybe don't. And that's about as far as it ends up going.
Isn't that the problem? I mean,
that's the problem.
That's the problem. They're just stuck in
Yep.
good, not great, not terrible purgatory.
10-7. The difference between 10-7 and 7-10 is nothing. Like, you guys know that. I mean, we've talked about it a million times, Tyler, haven't we? Like when we were with the Bills, we were 8-8, 7-9. We get fired. They go 9-7, get it. It's all the same. Like, you're the same team every year. What are you really trying to win a Super Bowl? Are you really going to win a Super Bowl that way? No. I mean, that's not the way to at least try to build it. You could, like the Giants did. Obviously, that doesn't always happen. But
I can't do the math in my head with these records. Like,
the
it sounds
10-7,
weird.
Like,
Somebody did do the math and sent me an email and basically said like 10-7 is no different than 9-7. When it comes to what your percentage of chance to make the playoffs is going to be, it's going to be about the same, which means that they could even go 10-7 and not make the playoffs. And then I think if you miss the playoffs, you probably have a new coach. But if you make the playoffs, then are we like doing the 2019 thing again where, oh, well, if you win, then you keep your job and you lose? Because the Vikings were ready to either trade Mike Zimmer to the Dallas Cowboys or straight up fire him and hire Kevin Stefanski in 2019. If they got blown out by the Saints, that was happening.
It's amazing.
They win the game. They extend Cousins. They stay with Zimmer. It's amazing. And you go,
amazing.
How are you making this decision on one game? But that's what happens. I mean, right? Because if they fire him after this big, exciting win over the Saints, then it kind of looks silly. So it's weird that it's somebody who has such a good track record as Mike Zimmer, a great track record as a defensive coach throughout his career, and a good track record as a head coach. But even since 2016, when I got here to cover this team, it's always been kind of teetering. It's all because it's sort of the nature of not having a franchise quarterback that stabilizes everything. And then Zimmer also, as you laid out in your piece, Tyler, he just knows how to push the wrong buttons sometimes. And that's the thing, the margin for error, very thin if you don't have that guy who's going to bail you out, if you don't have Patrick Mahomes to make you right all the time.
Man. And it's just, it's crazy. Look at the Chicago Bears. And then we'll bring Dan on here. He'll be, he's got a text. He's looking at about 10 minutes away. So feel free to bail whenever you want. You can hang out, Matt. It's up to you. But like the Bears, like they beat Jacksonville. They beat Houston. I forget who the third team was. Beat like 3 kind of subpar teams, and everybody kept their jobs.
The Vikings, yeah.
The Vikings.
They beat the Vikings.
And everybody keeps their jobs because they make the playoffs. They get a shot at Justin Fields. Like they lose one of those games, if they miss the playoffs, if they're 7-9, 6-10, everybody should be fired. You would assume, right? Like,
yeah.
It's, and
God, sorry, Jim. It's hard to talk about this all because here we're sitting with Jim Monas, Doug Whaley. They string together like 4 great drafts in a row overall. I mean, you look at the players that you guys drafted, and a lot of them are playing in Super Bowls. Mm-hmm. And the one draft helped Sean McDermott and the Bills get this thing rolling, like we talked about last podcast. And he wants his own GM. He wants his own front office. They want to be in sync. You're the first to say, like, he has every right to do that. But that thin line, that's the theme of this podcast, man. Like that thin line between keeping your job, winning a Super Bowl, losing your job, talking on a podcast here with myself.
Yeah,
sorry, Jim.
But
hey, we got free beer from Hamburg, so hey, that's pretty good. It's pretty good, right?
What's great about our business is even though we get paid less, we get paid for a longer time because no one, or even when they do fire us, Tyler, we still make that money. That's the thing.
I got a lot of shit from people on Twitter today because I don't know if you saw that story. Like these shark advocates, they wanted like shark killings to be called like interactions, and I threw out there like these shark advocates in quotes should get jobs in quotes, and there's a few people that like trashing sports journalists. I mean, it was, made me laugh. It was kind of funny, but
our jobs are pretty ridiculous.
I mean, we are talking about football. Yeah. Right. It's hard to argue back at them, right? Like I went to one guy, like people want to stop paying for sports media one day. I guess what can you do? Supply and demand, but
I do want
advocates.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
To
the sun.
I wanted to ask Matt about Rick Spielman because he's fascinating. Like Tyler and I've told Tyler, he's always a little different, in the as far as front office guys that I knew well. I didn't know him very well, but I don't know how many people actually do know him very well. He's just a little, just a little quirky, whatever. But when is he going to become the Detroit Lions next GM? Because his brother has a high position there. And if this shakes out the way, if this Vikings thing goes bad in another year or two, he's out. And don't for a second think that wouldn't happen.
There's no nepotism in football, Jim. None.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, the Vikings.
Rob Ryan's so happy about it.
The Vikings defensive coordinator is Mike Zimmer's son, and their offensive coordinator is Gary Kubiak's son. So I'm familiar with this subject. But that's an interesting question because my experience with Spielman is that he is a unique guy for sure. There was an SI story about how on game days, he puts his shoes on before his pants. And so like that kind of told the story. He's got all these kind of weird quirks and things like that. He loves to make jokes during press conferences that don't really hit.
Nobody knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. And not only that, but like he would do it on Zoom calls with us and be like, hey guys, nobody write this, but I'll make this joke anyway. And we're like, it's being streamed on Twitter, Rick. I don't know if you realize this, but so there's a lot of those moments where we've had with him where we're like, I don't know what was going on there, but he struggles to pronounce players' names and things like that. He's very quirky, but I do think that he has led them into being a very modern front office. And this is one of the reasons why there's headbutting with Mike Zimmer, and not necessarily Rick Zimmer personally that I know of, but it's just like he wants to have this front office that's analytics based and science based. And like they have, when they built their TCO Performance Center, they did it with all these crazy things, cryogenic, this and that, and whatever. So they want to be at the very cutting edge as a front office and as an organization. And then you have Bill Parcells Jr. as your head coach, like wanting to be like old school and run the football and all these things. And so there's always been this little bit of like, they're connected in their contracts and they always have been, but are they connected in who's taking responsibility for this? Because my understanding is that Zimmer is the captain of the ship. And so, and Rick told me this specifically, so I can speak to this, that Zimmer makes the grocery list and Spielman gets him the groceries. So Zimmer would be the one saying, get me another nose tackle, right? And so he's telling them, here's what I need. And the front office's job is to get him what he needs. And so that makes me wonder how that goes. At the same time, the failure of a lot of draft picks has been one of the reasons they are where they are. why they had to spend so much money. I mean, you go through and some of the processes that resulted in Hunter and Kendricks and Stephon Diggs in the same draft, they haven't worked out. They've tried to draft like doppelgangers for those guys, but they just haven't worked because almost nobody does. Every year we hear in a press conference, hey, this guy, he's just like Danielle Hunter coming out. And you're like, nope, no, he isn't. Right. This guy, he reminds me of Diggs. Probably not though. And so they keep drafting receivers in the 5th and lanky defensive ends in the 3rd. And so I wonder if, some of those things, like they didn't really realize that was an outlier season or an outlier draft, and they just kind of kept going back to it. But then I also circle back to, it's probably some bad luck too. Like Mike Hughes just got hurt. What are you going to do? Right. So, and the same thing with Bridgewater, like he just got hurt. What are you going to do? So but it is fascinating because I do think they have one of the stronger structures of front offices, and you see other teams picking from their front office because of this, because they have a lot of good people there. But I've never thought that it truly was like lockstep with what the head coach wants.
Hard Knocks kind of sucks now. It's watered down, overly sanitized. Just like you took Purell and just poured it all over hard. It's just awful. I mean, it was unwatchable last year with the Raiders and just, cringeworthy. I would love a real raw Hard Knocks and just like, you're not allowed to get final say. Like the team has no say in editorial production, none. And just follow the interactions between Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. Like 2 totally different personalities. I mean, I'm sure you heard this too, Matt. I mean, I was told that Zimmer does not treat Rick Spielman very good at all. Let's just see how they interact through the hallway. There are players that said how like Rick, they'd walk by him in the hallway and it was kind of odd, wouldn't really say hi or make small talk. It was just like, he tried to keep it professional, business-like, which, I mean, you can make the case for that, right? I mean, he might be cutting your ass tomorrow and he doesn't want to get too close. He doesn't want to get too personal, but one guy told me it was kind of strange. Like, I would love a real Hard Knocks just in the middle of all of that. It'd be a lot of fun.
Well, especially with Zimmer. The only thing I would say about Zimmer in the way that he is perceived to treat Rick Spielman is just that he's kind of that way to everybody, though. Like
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
We talked about Cousins being inconsistent. Well, Zimmer is consistent, I think, and he's consistently a hard ass to everybody. And so, like, that was funny because the thing that you saw Zimmer in Hard Knocks in, I think it was 2000.
That's right. We did see some of it.
Yeah. I think that's him. Like, I think he is really hard on people. And I also think he's one of the most competitive people that I've ever been around in sports. Stephon Diggs is one of them for sure. Mike Zimmer is also one of them. And I could see where those two would butt heads too. Because think about this, like Zimmer had you guys know George Edwards. He'd been around a defensive coordinator who was proven in the NFL and all this talent and a defense that George Edwards was completely fluent in over the years, but he just never wanted to ever relinquish those play calling duties. And we asked him why one time, and he said something like, I wouldn't want to blame anybody else for us losing or making a mistake. And I was like, well, that's kind of contradictory to a lot of your press conferences, but kind of the point to take away there though, is that Mike Zimmer is, I mean, I don't want to say control freak, but kind of, right? Like he's so obsessed with not being fired. He's so obsessed with winning that sometimes that ends up being to his detriment. Where you're like, Mike, maybe you would have challenged a play if you weren't doing the play calling, or maybe you would have been able to manage this situation with players better if you weren't putting it all on you, or maybe you should keep your hands off the offense because you're not an offensive coach, right? Like there are a lot of things that you could say. That's why he's always been a fascinating character to me, because I think he is a tremendous head coach. It's just that it's like your family members, when you know somebody so well, like we do at this point with Mike Zimmer, you really can see all the flaws that go along with that. And like many people, what makes him great, the competitiveness, also can be his biggest detriment.
Matt, I just claimed my beer for you because you said I shouldn't do it.
Yep.
On the mic, but that was amazing. You can hang out if you want, but you just gave us over an hour. So I figured we could, let you get back to your family, your life,
Purple
I
Insider,
appreciate that.
all these good things. That was just incredible insight on the Vikes.
And I do appreciate you guys. I'm happy to help with your audio issues anytime. And Jim, you can absolutely bet that I will be leaning on your expertise other times. It's always great to talk with you. And I know that I was the guest on the podcast, but I was like wanting to also ask you a bunch of questions because your depth of knowledge is incredible. So you guys are doing an awesome podcast, and I'm going to bounce, but we'll do it again sometime soon.
Thank you so much. Everybody
Thanks,
out there, please follow Matt. It's at Matthew Coller on Twitter,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
And Purple Insider in the Substack community. Fantastic website, newsletter, every story right in your inbox. So subscribe and follow this unbelievably fascinating team that we just talked about. So thank you so much, Matt.
Appreciate you guys. We'll do it again soon.
All righty, man. We'll see you.
Football.
All right, everyone. We're joined now by my good buddy, Dan Wiederer. Dan, it's good to see you in Zoom. I mean, we really got to be doing this in person, smashing some beers at Kilroy's at the Combine or something, like our once a year. And Jim, we could have all been doing that together. That's the shame of it all. But here we are.
I told you earlier, Tyler. Yeah, we've got a lot to catch up on. It has to be in person at some place. And I actually saw that the Combine schedule for next year is already out, March 1st through 7th, if you're marking your calendar.
I think we all are, because we all have kids, and we'll be marking that down right now. We had to hit pause on the record to just kind of catch up on all of our sleep regressions in life, and exchange advice with all of that. I mean, we could do a dad podcast at some point.
Yeah, no doubt. It probably has a bigger market, right?
I love it, man. Well, it's great to see you again. For everybody out there, follow Dan on Twitter. Is it at Dan Wiederer?
That's
What's
it.
your name?
Amazingly,
Wiederer.
Yeah, amazingly today I got my blue check mark. I don't know why it took like 7 years for that thing to come through, but it just came in today. So here we are.
Wow.
Fully verified.
You're official. You're official.
Well, that's the only reason we have you on.
Yeah,
I mean,
finally.
You were just a guy, a jag
Yeah.
in the scouting community, as they say. But no, Dan is one of, if not the best feature writer in the business when it comes to all things sports. I was going to say football, but I mean, you're doing it all at the Chicago Tribune. Should have led with that. You're at the Chicago Tribune. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, give us a sense about your job, kind of where you're at right now with kind of jumping into different sports. I mean, you're on the beat covering the Bears.
Yeah.
Before that, you were covering the Vikings at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And before that, we were at the Fayetteville Observer together in North Carolina long ago.
Yeah, I was covering college basketball back then. So, I tell people all the time that Coach K is one of my favorite people, which is funny because when I went down to take that gig in 2004, I couldn't stand Duke and I couldn't stand Coach K, and I left there with him as one of my favorite people in all sports. So that's a little background on my pre-football days. But now, yeah, it's 95% of my life is following the Bears, and then I'll mix in here and there with some baseball coverage, some college coverage, some other stuff that's going on.
Your Michael Jordan series, I mean, on his dad's death was unbelievable.
Well, and also last year, I can't tell you how rescued we were at the Chicago Tribune and how rescued we were in Chicago as a city to have the last dance for 5 weeks during a sports deprived landscape. I mean, that's all anyone in Chicago wanted to talk about. It's all we wanted to write about. It was this blessing from above that gave us actual content for a month plus at a time where there was no sports being played anywhere, right? People forget that there was this void in all our lives where you couldn't even sit down at night and turn on a game you didn't care about and just veg, right? And so thankfully the Last Dance gave us a lot of content, and for me, a time machine back to the glory days of my existence as a sports fan in the 90s, right? As a teenager growing up in Chicago and absolutely, idolizing that team and obviously Michael Jordan. And so that was awesome a year ago.
You know what's crazy is the NBA finals are going on right now. And I feel like more people were all watching The Last Dance and all talking about The Last Dance and this team from a different generation than they are about. I mean, it's been a great finals, don't get me wrong, but like, you're right. It was nuts. I mean, we're going to look back at that COVID period in sports and it just, there's nothing like it at all.
No, ever. And hopefully never again, because I couldn't stand it.
All right. Well, let's talk about the Bears. So we just talked about the Vikings for an hour plus with Matt Coller, kind of a team that thinks they're going to win.
I don't know. I mean, they're kind of in the same spot, probably 10-7, 11-6. See what happens with Kirk Cousins. What's the expectation with Chicago? Like the realistic expectation after everybody probably thought they were going to get fired. They beat the Jags, they beat the Texans, they beat the Vikes, keep the job, they get Justin Fields. Where are they at?
Yeah, they lost the season finale, and in the moment it felt like, well, there goes the playoff dreams. And then the Cardinals with Kyler Murray's injury in Week 17 lost and opened up the back door for the Bears to sneak in. So the Bears got a playoff appearance, an undeserved playoff appearance, in my opinion. The number 7 seed, never awarded ever before in the NFC. All of a sudden, the Bears get it. They get into the playoffs and they get blown out of New Orleans by the Saints. And I can't tell you how frustrated this fan base was in January, compounding, not to mention December and November and October, because a couple of years ago when the Bears came off that 12-4 season in 2018 and looked like they were on this on-ramp, right, to 5, 6, 7, 8 years of being in the playoffs and contending for a Super Bowl. And the last 2 years have been 8-8. It's been mediocrity. It's been terrible offense. It's been struggling quarterback play. Mitch Trubisky's no longer here. Before we got to April in the draft, this fan base was done. They were fed up. Ted Phillips, the CEO and team president of this team, said at the year-end press conference in January that other than the quarterback position and the wins, everything else is in place. And that was the quote that set Chicago off, because people said, other than the wins and the quarterback, what? I mean, isn't that, those are the two things in football that mean the most. And so there was this absolute mutiny and onslaught of criticism for this organization. And then came the final Thursday, April, and all of a sudden Justin Fields slips down the draft board. The Bears make that trade up from 21 to 11 to get Justin Fields, and everything did a 180. All of a sudden, hope in this city mushroomed and was restored. And now this entire city is believing that they got this lottery ticket in Justin Fields that's going to change the fortunes of a franchise that hasn't had a quarterback in 102 years, right? And so this is a lot of pressure for Justin Fields, but there's a lot of belief for him coming in here that he can be the guy. And so for me, I really see this team in 2021 as a team that's going to be right on that 8-9, 9-8 fence and trying to figure out which side of that they want to get to. But it's really all about, what does Justin Fields look like in December and January? And what does that mean going into 2022? Everything else is just window dressing. And it's all about, where is Fields at the end of this year? Is he a guy like Burrow and Herbert that you get to the end of the year and you say, yeah, ink him in the depth chart for the next 8-10 years and let's roll? And hopefully that's where the Bears get to. It's funny to me that there's so much optimism and hope around a team that everyone sort of is of the understanding is going to hover around 500, particularly with their schedule this year.
That's what I talked about earlier. I think the Bears have a tough schedule this year. And this division, Vikings and Packers are obviously, I think, both legit. We know that. I think Detroit's awful. But this Bears, I think the head coach, I think Nagy, like, this Justin Fields thing is fascinating because, okay, in my opinion, starting right now, the Andy Dalton thing is ridiculous. You trade up and get this guy. If I was the Bears ownership and everything, I said, hey, if we're going up for a quarterback again, he's got to start. Like, what do we like? Why? So to your point, so do you go 8-9, but Fields plays really well, and 4 of those, he wins the last 4 games of the year and he looks great. You just wasted a year, to me, of no, like, just play him. And the other thing you got to find out, to me, is Nagy is he the true head coach for this guy, for the future?
For the offense, as a quarterback developer, that's why they hired Matt Nagy in 2018, because they thought he was going to be a guy that would unlock Mitch Trubisky, who, by the way, they drafted with the number 2 overall pick, and thought that they had found the perfect marriage to take him to the heights that he was going to get to. Didn't happen, right? So now Matt has questions to answer. Matt can no longer fall back on the excuse that I wasn't here when Trubisky was drafted. That wasn't my guy. Justin Fields is now his guy. Justin Fields is also more talented, more dynamic, more of a big play game changer than Mitch Trubisky. And so if you can't get it unlocked with Justin Fields, then there's serious questions about your credentials, right? And your ability to get this thing unlocked.
So Nagy, obviously, he wasn't there when they drafted Trubisky, but he's the reason they had Nick Foles.
Right.
And that was, I thought, Tyler and I talked about this. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. What they did to Trubisky last year was wrong. Say what you want about them. At the time, they were 3-0.
Yeah.
And then you just done. And Foles is shot. Foles can't play at all right
No, and the part of the Nick Foles experiment went haywire because of the pandemic shortened year, right? Like Nick didn't have OTAs and minicamp to get on the field with teammates, to work on timing, to develop rapport with guys.
That's a good
Nick
point.
showed up, the first, I don't remember when camp started. It was like August 18th or something last year. It was the first time he had on-field practice time with his teammates. And so the belief they had when they traded for him that he could come in and sort of be a catalyst for this offense if things went haywire with Trubisky was sort of short-circuited because he didn't have the time to be acclimated, right? Didn't have 6 weeks of training camp, didn't have preseason games, didn't have all that time with his teammates. And so that went haywire, and it is what it is. But to your point, that was a hand-selected guy by Matt Nagy that went wrong, right? And so now you've got to take a hand-selected guy and make sure something goes right at some point. This offense has been, bottom third of the league for Matt's entire tenure here. And while I give Matt a lot of credit for what he did his first season as a coach, NFL Coach of the Year in 2018, for sort of establishing a belief and a confidence in that think big mentality that they lived on that year, you also have to remember that Vic Fangio was as much responsible for that 2018 ascent as anybody. That defense was absolutely dominant. They were elite in 2018. They carried that entire team throughout the year. And so now they're making a change on that side of the ball with Sean Desai replacing Chuck Pagano at coordinator. And that's as significant as anything besides Justin Fields in this organization in 2021, because there's an internal belief that Desai, who's a disciple of Fangio, can get back to utilizing his playmakers in a way that allows the defense to be this total game-changing unit. When you look at last year and Khalil Mack doesn't get to double-digit sacks, Eddie Jackson doesn't have a single interception the entire year, you say, wait a second, too many big playmakers weren't productive. And so maybe a change in coordinator helps that side of the ball. But back to your original point, Matt needs to use 2021 as a proving ground to show that he knows what offense is in the NFL and how to succeed with it and how to use a bunch of different weapons in a way where they all feel satisfied, but the offense is scoring on a regular basis. And it hasn't happened. You look at the talent, there's players here. David Montgomery, great finish to 2020. Allen Robinson, still one of the best receivers in the NFL. Darnell Mooney, a rookie last year who seems to be on the climb. Cole Kmet, promising. So there are pieces here. And now it's just about the coordinator and the head coach and everybody putting their heads together to get quarterback play to be at a level that allows you to succeed. It hasn't happened here in forever. And that's why that frustration is always, knocking on the door. Even when hope is the most important guest at the party, frustration is just outside the door saying, hey, don't forget about me. I've lived here for 100+ years.
We talked a lot about just the power structure with Matt Coller with the Vikings. It seems like, the owners, they were pretty cool with, all right, it's a winning team, probably going to make the playoffs or at least compete for the playoffs, build a new stadium, fill that stadium. Things will be all right. Mike Zimmer keeps his job. Rick Spielman keeps his job. Everything kind of stays the same there for better or worse. What's it like in Chicago with McCaskey, with Ted Phillips underneath him, down to Ryan Pace, to Matt Nagy? Like, it just, when I was working on that Allen Robinson stuff, I was back in February, I just got the sense that kind of distant, kind of, all right, do your thing, but if everybody's freaking out about Allen Robinson, address it. It goes away. All right, whatever. Do whatever you want. And even Ted Phillips almost seemed kind of distant. I don't know. What's it really like there? What's the apparatus in Chicago?
I think there's substantial belief from above, from George McCaskey and Ted Phillips, that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are the right men for these jobs. They don't do a great job of articulating why they believe in Ryan and Matt. And George set up standards going into last year saying that he needed to see whether the 2020 Bears were more like 2018 or more like 2019 to make a judgment on the men leading his franchise. Well, guess what? They had the identical record in 2020 as they had in 2019. That was 4 wins short and a division championship short of 2018. And yet the end result was, we still believe in this guy to carry us forward. That was a head scratcher for people all the way up until the draft, where it was like, wait a second, you set a bar for them. They didn't clear that bar. And yet you said, whatever, let's stay status quo. And that was what had most of Chicago so unnerved and agitated and frustrated. Well, now Matt and Ryan sold George and Ted on their ability to go out and collaborate and put their heads together and find an answer at the quarterback position. Started in March with the signing of Andy Dalton, that followed in April by lucking into to a large extent Justin Fields in the draft. I told people the week after the draft, it's okay to celebrate the arrival of Justin Fields, but don't celebrate that as some genius move by Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. This was like finding $100 bill on the sidewalk and picking it up, right? You get credit. You still have the $100 bill in your pocket, but it didn't take much for you to get it. It was just there for you. And so that's kind of the state that they're living in right now. I think what frustrates Chicago a lot is there's a sense that George and Ted don't necessarily have the football acumen to do intelligent evaluations of the guys who are running their football operation. And I think that's what folks on the outside of the building want to see more of. Like, give us an informed, intelligent evaluation of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, and please tell us why you believe in them. And it doesn't always feel like that's happening. It's like, we believe in them because we believe in them. And you go, okay, all right, well, let's see. And what are the results? Well, the Bears will hang their hats on the 2 of the last 3 years they've been in the playoffs. You heard me comment earlier on what last year's playoff berth meant. I thought it was a total seduction. 7th seed seduction is what I was calling it last December when they were trying to get that, because it was going to trick people into thinking that it was an achievement. It wasn't an achievement. It was a mediocre year that was rewarded only because the NFL decided to expand the playoff party, right? And so now it's up to these guys to prove all across the board that they can be a winning football team on a much higher level than 8-8. You guys know what 8-8 is. It's mediocre. The Bears are awesome at being mediocre, right? Now it's time to be good at being good at some point, right?
That relationship between like an owner and a team president and, like the business higher ups and the people actually running the football team, a lot of it is really like a relationship, like when you're dating somebody, isn't it? Like, oh, you just stay together because you don't want to make somebody sad. Right. Like they don't want to. They're worried that maybe Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, like it's gonna be a really messy breakup. Like oh my God, like how are we gonna go into the house and get our clothes and get our gear and leave? It's gonna be awful. We can't do that. And so everybody just kind of stays together and everything just gets worse.
This is such a great point. When I tell you, so when we got hired in Buffalo with Marone and Whaley brought me in, and Marone and I worked together in New Orleans. So we were just like dating. I mean, it was like over the top those first year and a half. Like, we got this thing. We're going to get this thing heading in the right direction. Boom. Every day. By the time it ended, we don't talk anymore. And Rex comes in. We're celebrating. We're best friends. We're loving life. By the time it ends, don't want to talk anymore. It is, Tyler, that is exactly how it works. Trust me. It's incredible. The honeymoon phase is, we've all fallen for it. It happens in relationships and in sport. The honeymoon phase is real, and you shouldn't believe it.
Well, in some cases here, I think sometimes it's difficult for George McCaskey to get rid of good people, even though they haven't had the results that prove that they're great employees, right? And so that's a difficult trapdoor that they sometimes fall in here, where it's they work hard, right? And they have all the right intentions, and boy, they're giving it their all to make us a better team, and we should just believe in that. And what I've said for years, months, whatever timetable you want to put on that, is there's not enough of a realization from the top of the organization at House Hall that this is a cutthroat business. And if you want to be great on an every year basis, you have to approach every day with a cutthroat mentality. And it can't just be, we're going to settle here, we're going to settle there. Oh, that's good enough. Like 8-8's not good enough. And if you start figuring out that 8-8 is good enough, well, then good luck being mediocre. And you can go back through it. I mean, the Bears haven't had a sustained run of success since, the early 90s, right? Since Ditka left. And part of that is because there isn't an understanding internally of what it takes to attain that level of success. Number one, you got to find a quarterback, right? And this has been the age-old problem here. But beyond that, I think you just have to understand that even when people are good people, you have to hold them to a much greater standard in the National Football League if you want to be the Packers or the Patriots or the Ravens or the Steelers or these organizations that are constantly in the mix and trying to win championships, the Seahawks, and they're there every year. It's a cutthroat world. And if you're not ready to acknowledge that, then be ready to sort of sit in that middle tier to the bottom tier over and over again and just keep spinning that cycle.
Yeah, because it's like the girlfriend who's a great person, right? Like,
yeah,
you don't want to break up with them because they're too nice, and it's going to be messy.
Feels like you
We
got
just wanna avoid it.
some stories you need to tell us here, Tyler, about past girlfriends.
I'm just going to drive this analogy into the ground. But it happens at the quarterback position too. I mean, I'm just thinking of you with the Bills, Jim. Like EJ was a really good guy. Like, right? I mean, EJ Manuel was a hard worker, great guy, and it was probably somebody you wanted to root for internally.
Everything.
Same thing in Chicago with Mitchell Trubisky.
I was
Same
gonna say,
thing.
two guys in my world that fit that bill, Christian Ponder and Mitch Trubisky. These guys didn't fail because they didn't want to work hard. They didn't fail because they were selfish prima donnas. They didn't fail because they couldn't connect with their teammates. They failed because playing quarterback at a high level in the NFL is really damn hard. And sometimes it takes more than those, prerequisites to success to actually achieve the success. And so now you got to figure out a way to get that unlocked. Justin Fields comes in here, by all accounts, is a guy that has a drive that's off the charts, is a guy that really knows how to connect with teammates. And now it's all about, okay, can you use those things as fuel, to help you have success? And so that, again, so much of this year from now through mid-January is going to be about Justin Fields, when he's playing, when he's not playing, all those things. The entire storyline is going to revolve around where is he at on the developmental curve? And then again, where is he at the end of the year? And do you believe when you get to the end of the year that, okay, it's what we felt on draft night. We got our guy and he's definitely our guy, and let's go attack 2022.
What do you think? I mean, you've probably been digging into this guy more than anybody on the beat. What's your sense on Justin Fields and in relation to what he's walking into? I mean, to be a quarterback for the Chicago Bears, like you said, 102 years, they haven't had one.
Well, one of the things that always worried me about Mitch, and when Rich Campbell and I did that deep dive on the 2017 draft a couple of years ago, and the Bears' attraction to Trubisky and how it sort of blinded them to seeing qualities in Mahomes and Watson that they probably should have seen and pulled the trigger. I would have taken Deshaun Watson in that slot without even a hesitation. And one of the things that worried me about Trubisky is we had a source say us he was the quarterback at North Carolina. He wasn't the point guard at North Carolina. And basically that was a way of saying, look, it's different playing football at UNC than it is playing basketball. There's a different spotlight. Mitch had never been on the stage for a long period of time where he understood what expectations can feel like and what pressure can feel like and what that can, amplify into when you start to struggle. And I thought that in 2019, after they won the division and they came back in 2019 with Super Bowl hopes, legitimate Super Bowl hopes going into that season for obvious reasons, that when Mitch started out that season struggling, he then struggled with struggling, right? And he had this psychological sort of wanted to pull himself out of this rut and then almost over tried to pull himself out of that rut. And then the rut just continued. With Justin Fields, at least that he's played at Ohio State. He's played in college football playoff games. He's played in the national title game. He's had this big stage experience at a program where that spotlight, even when you're playing Indiana on a Saturday in October, it feels like, this is the real deal and this is a huge game and everyone's watching. And so I worry less about that. Here's some things that really excite me about Justin Fields. I've given people this before. He is the exact same size as Eddie George was coming out of Ohio State. He runs a faster 40 time than Eddie George ran coming out of Ohio State. And oh, by the way, he can throw the ball 60 yards down the field on a dime and put it in there. And so when you look athletically, you say, my goodness, the gifts are here to do whatever you want in the NFL, right? It's not going to be an athleticism problem. It's not going to be a talent problem. Now it's all about, can you be in the right system? Can you learn things fast enough to be able to see things a split second ahead of the defense and be able to make those throws, put the ball where it needs to go, make sure the guys are where they need to be when it needs to get there. There's a lot of reasons to feel like the package that the Bears have to work with is 10 times more exciting than it was when Trubisky came in. Even though Trubisky was talented and athletic and worked hard and all those things, this is a different beast here in Fields. And so I think that's why the month of August with training camp and then, oh, by the way, suddenly everyone is excited for a preseason game schedule. Like 3 preseason games feel awesome for a Bears team that's saying that Andy Dalton's going to be your week 1 starter because it's your glimpse at Justin Fields. And people are going to glom onto every highlight in the preseason and be like, here we go. That's the Justin Fields show. And so I think there's an excitement there. And I think that this kid is wired and conditioned. Look, he was a top quarterback, going way back to high school where the pressure and the expectations were on him. He's wired to know what this is all about. I don't worry about that part of things. I worry more so that this league just takes talented quarterback prospects on the regular chews them up, spits them out. And that's just what happens because it's really, really hard to succeed at that position.
Nagy had such a good answer for we'll know when it's time.
Yeah.
So you guys don't worry about it, right? We'll know. It's a great answer because that will know could be that third preseason game and
Right.
Fields, whatever, and they'll be like, that's what we want. We needed to see certain, you can already see the press conference. We put some things in. We wanted to see how he reacted, and he did it. We now know there is no reason to play Andy Dalton. There just isn't.
So I'll give you two things on this. Number one, first of all, you go back to Russell Wilson many years ago and the way he ascended in training camp. And there got to be a point, late in that preseason where Pete Carroll and company said that this is a no-brainer. Russell's going to start for us. And we go that route. In Philadelphia, the Bears' current quarterback coach, John DeFilippo, was with Carson Wentz as a rookie. And Wentz didn't have a great rookie year, but they knew in training camp that Wentz was ready. And so that gave them the luxury when the Vikings needed a quarterback to say, hey, Sam, you want to head to Minnesota? And off went Sam Bradford because they knew that Carson Wentz was ready enough to take that on. One of the reasons that the Bears are set on starting Andy Dalton week 1 is because Matt and the staff, they want to give Fields a long enough on-ramp to the expressway so that he feels comfortable and doesn't sort of walk into training camp feeling like that Kiefer Sutherland 24 clock ticking over his head, being like, 36 days till the opener, 34 days till the opener.
Oh,
tick,
great
tock, tick,
show.
tock,
Great.
right. And suddenly
show.
feeling the pressure. I'm like, I'm not quite ready. But oh my God, all I can hear is the beeping of that clock. Right. And so having Andy Dalton here at least gives Justin Fields the, ability to exhale, that peace of mind that I don't have to do this all in 1 week. I don't have to do this all in 2 weeks. I've got time to learn things. Matt also was in Kansas City in 2017 when the Chiefs left Patrick Mahomes on the bench until the regular season finale when he was basically a placeholder heading into the playoffs for Alex Smith.
It's crazy to think about now.
They had the luxury of doing that though, because Alex Smith was playing, playoff level football for a division championship team. And I think he had a quarterback rating up around 103 or something that season. And so you can do that when you're winning. If the Bears are 2-3, 2-4, and Andy Dalton is the Andy Dalton that we expect him to be, which is middle of the road, at some point you can't justify keeping Justin Fields on the bench because, to your point, Jim, you're just wasting experience, right? You're wasting time for him to be on a field in regular season games, learning how to see defenses, making mistakes, being able to come back in the film room and correct those mistakes. That's where that's why I think that while Andy will start the year, I don't think it's going to be very long before everything else sort of aligns where you say, okay, we've got to open the door to the bullpen and in comes Justin Fields and this city will go nuts, for his debut. And then they'll have to deal with all the bumps in the road that all rookie quarterbacks go through. But it's coming. And that's why I tell people that are really anti this Andy Dalton starting thing. I said, Justin Fields' time is coming. It's coming sooner rather than later. And if you can just condition yourself to have a month more patience than you want to, you're going to feel great when we hit Halloween and Justin Fields is the starting quarterback for at least the next 3 years. Right. And then hopefully the Bears can finally find a quarterback that they can, sign to a second deal and turn into their long-term answer.
It's the ex front office coming out of me where like when I watched Fields, I evaluated him this year. I thought he was as good as Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
I felt like they were that. You could throw either one, I think, is ready to play. So to me, now you may, like, if the Bears, obviously they felt that strongly about Fields, went up and got him. Let's go. I just want, that's me in the front office saying, hey, if we get this guy, let's play him. But at the same time, there's always a reason. Maybe he isn't picking things. We won't know on the ins, on the outside. We don't know why but to your point, let's not rush it. So yeah, it makes sense to me, but it also just is like, come on. We know we know.
Well, it's Tom Savage starting for the Houston Texans. It's Aaron Rodgers starting for the Green Bay Packers when you got Jordan. I mean, clearly you just turn the page. Like,
well, Tyler, it's interesting you bring that up because that's part of the Bears conversation right now is what's happening in Green Bay. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, you're telling us that there's a possibility that Aaron Rodgers never plays in the Bears-Packers rivalry again? Like when that became a storyline and all these people in Green Bay are saying, Aaron doesn't want to be back. Aaron's not coming back. It was like in Chicago, it was like, you have to be bleeping kidding me, right? Like 30 years, they've gone into that rivalry game with a Hall of Fame quarterback on the other sideline. And now it's like, Jordan Love, sure, bring it on. We'll take Jordan Love over Favre and Rodgers any day of the week. Let's open this division back up and let's roll. And I know you come from a different train of thought on this in some ways, TD, but Rodgers has been dominant in this division forever, right?
Oh my
I
God,
think
yeah.
I ran the numbers back in the spring. Even though he hasn't won the big one since, what is that, 2010? Was that the Super Bowl year? He's got more playoff wins as a starter. He's got 11 playoff wins as a starter. The Vikings, Lions, and Bears combined during Rodgers' tenure as a starter, 4 postseason wins. So he has almost 3 times as many postseason wins as the rest of the division combined. You understand why the rest of the division is looking at that drama in Green Bay and trying to throw fuel on that, right? And be like, oh man, Aaron, you should continue hating your GM, and all these other things, because they have every reason to want this division to open wide open again. And trust me, folks here are as excited about the anxiety in Green Bay as they are about Justin Fields being their rookie quarterback.
I mean, he's just been that villain, right? That just kind of shows up week 16, 17 and just crushes Bears fans' hopes and dreams. Was it 2013?
2013.
That was a collarbone for him. Every week, where's he at with the collarbone? Where's he at? Matt Flynn somehow comes back to beat the Cowboys. And that game was insane. They were down 29-3 at halftime. Nuts. He does just enough to kind of keep them within striking range. They get to that week 17, and what happens on 4th and 8? John Kuhn just gets enough on Julius Peppers. Chris Connie, I don't know what he was doing in coverage on Randall Cobb. Touchdown in Chicago, Soldier Field. I mean, the Bears have to win that game. Like, they have to win that game.
And that's one anecdote I could list, like 147 Rodgers plays where he tore the heart out of the Bears defense and Bears fans, and it's a horror film that you've seen 150 times before. And so the idea of not having to watch that horror film again to fans in Chicago is like, oh my God, this could be the greatest thing ever, right? And again, I know you have great belief in who Jordan Love is going to be as a quarterback up there, but trust me, everyone here would rather see Jordan Love under center than 12, right? And we'll see what happens when they play for the first time this fall. But man, it's a crazy situation to watch, and it's part of this division, right? I mean, it's part of the landscape that if that happens, everything changes, right? And it's all wide open again. And all of a sudden you have to start looking at it through a different lens.
I just feel like I think Jordan Love is a lot better than probably a lot of other people, but I just don't think this Aaron Rodgers problem is going to go away. Like, I don't think he shows up day 1 at training camp still. He shows up by the opener. We'll see what happens. Even then, I don't think all of this just magically disappears. I think he'll be a malcontent to some degree, and at the best, this is his last season. It's not going to be a pretty situation in Green Bay.
But here's my counter argument to that: is malcontent or not malcontent? I would rather have a malcontent MVP than a Boy Scout who plays quarterback at a
no doubt
level, right? And so that's where when you're on the outside looking in, you say, how did Green Bay let it get to this point where they can't keep him at least remotely happy to show up for training camp, right? Like if you want the alternative, look at the last 30 years of Bears quarterback history and how difficult it is to constantly reset at the position and constantly be looking for the answer. Is it Cutler? Is it Mike Glennon? Is it Matt Barkley? Is it Mitch Trubisky? Is it Justin Fields? Is it Andy Dalton? Is it Nick Foles? Is it Shane Matthews? Is it Cade McNown? Like,
absolutely, it's Cade McNown.
In Green Bay, all they've said is it Favre or is it Rodgers, right? And so, like, if you want to just go restart at quarterback, best of luck. Like, folks here will tell you it's not real easy.
It's not, but like, if he's going to be gone anyways by 2022, which even the most pro Rodgers, do everything you can, beg and plead and fire the GM and do anything you'd want for him to be the quarterback, would say, like, it's probably not going to last super, super long. Like, even wouldn't you want to take your 3 firsts, your 3 seconds, like, get as much as you can for him right now, move forward. You already drafted Jordan. You can't undo that draft pick. You drafted him the first one. You believe in him to a degree. Like,
I mean, you're a win away from
just do it. Just rip the Band-Aid off. Move forward.
You're a win away from the Super Bowl the last 2 years. That's not an easy place to get to. And so my thing is just ride this out until it can't be written anymore.
They are.
And so, it's fascinating. It's certainly the biggest story in the NFL heading into training camp, and in this division by far, it's the biggest storyline. And you know, and look, like, again, I know I mentioned the Bears defense earlier. I'm very interested to see if they can find themselves again. I mean, they've been good the last 2 years, but they haven't been dominant. And I think this defense has lived a lot off 2018. And I think that they need to pretend that they're the 2018 Bears again, and then actually show it, right? And that's where, you know, when we talk about Rodgers, you need to have a defense that can counteract some of these other offenses. And they haven't for the last couple of years. And until your offense shows that it can be an upper half of the league offense, you know, you need a defense to be your headliner and your star of the show. And so that means, look at the talent on defense: Akeem Hicks, Khalil Mack, Roquan Smith, Eddie Jackson, Danny Trevathan, Eddie Goldman. You know, it is a deep, talented defense, and it's going to have to be the engine of this team as they're trying to figure out the quarterback situation in the short term.
Prediction time. Let's hear it.
You want a
Oh,
record?
over under, Dan, how about over under 7.5 wins?
With Rodgers and without Rodgers in the division.
It's a perfect total that you threw me, because I've had them at 8-9. I think that, like I said earlier, I think they're going to be 8-9, possibly 9-8. You know, I've told people, everyone's like, well, they can't go 8-8 again. I said, you're wrong. They can go 8-8 again. They just have to play a 17th game after that, because I truly believe they may be 8-8 going into the finale in Minneapolis again. And so they will be 8-8 in 2019, 8-8 in 2020, 8-8 in 2021. Then they just got to play the 17th game for the first time, and we'll see which side of the result they're on there. So I'm sticking with 8-9. That puts me over 7.5, but only by a hair, as you can tell. And so we'll see where they go. I you know, and look, I said earlier about some of these offensive playmakers. It's a big year for Allen Robinson, Tyler, as you know. It's a big year for Dave Montgomery. It's a big year for Darnell Mooney. There's some fascinating players on this offense that are going to either benefit from better quarterback play and a better scheme and better play calling, or they're going to be stuck in the mud again. And all of a sudden, we're going to be back here in the same situation, having the same conversation over and over and over again.
And I thought we were going to talk about Allen Robinson this whole time. Like, I don't think that he's magically going to be happy. I don't, that's not going away. He's going to play. He's not the type that would hold out and but it's that the problem's still there.
Allen Robinson has a way of compartmentalizing his problems, as you know, and he's as good of a professional and as drama-free and low maintenance as you're going to get at that position in the NFL for a guy of that caliber.
Doubt about it.
And what I've said about Allen Robinson, and it's almost speaking from experience with myself, but like, there are certain people that are wired that if they feel disrespected or undervalued by their employer, for some reason, it just drives them to dig deeper and give more and try to prove. And fortunately for the Bears, that's how Allen Robinson is. Unfortunately for Allen, that can work against you, because it doesn't necessarily send the message that you want to your employer. Because it's like, oh, you're undervaluing me. I'm going to go work harder. I'm going to go produce more. I'm going to do everything you've ever asked me for and twice as much, right? And go that way. And that's who Allen Robinson is. And so I don't worry about any sort of contentious feelings or ill will sort of bubbling up and affecting anything with his play or the locker room or anything else, because he's just a dude who is so self-driven and so desiring to be one of the best receivers in the league that he doesn't know how to, become sort of a high maintenance, crybaby. He just goes and works harder. And usually the results of working harder is you produce more. And so, I think it's, in the end, Allen's going to have a big year. There's going to be a 17th game on the schedule that allows his production to go up. He's going to get, the chance next year to either negotiate with the Bears or test the open market. And Allen's going to get paid, and he's going to get paid handsomely. And he's going to get his reward. The problem is he just goes into this year with zero security and plenty of risk in case he gets injured. As you know, his last year in Jacksonville, tore the ACL, and all of a sudden the contract year, you're like, God, now I've got rehab, and that depresses the market and all those things. So that's a tough break for him, but I'm not worried about any drama or anything with him.
It's just ridiculous that the Bears would let it get to this point. Like, I think he would. There was a time when he would have taken a long-term deal that's market value in line with his numbers and what people were making then. Didn't happen. I mean, talk about relationships going sour. I mean, the Bears kind of screwed that one up long ago. So, from my point, I don't think he's going to forget when he gets to that point next off season. Regardless of what happens this season, I don't think he's going to forget that. But he's going to work his ass off. He's going to have a big year. So maybe that's what the Bears want. Just
what I was going to say, circling back to the quarterback position, one of the things that I constantly said with Robinson last year when the contract didn't get done was, why do you still want to be in Chicago? Why do you want to be in an organization that has never brought you a quarterback that can bring out the best in you? Well, now they have Justin Fields. So if there's anyone inside that building that needs Justin Fields to play as soon as possible, it's Allen Robinson, because he needs a big sample size to ask himself, like, okay, do I want to play with this guy for 5 years, right? Is this guy, Patrick Mahomes 2.0, where when I'm open, the ball's right on my hands and it's a catch and it's in the end zone, and all of a sudden everyone's production goes up, the winning occurs and all that. So Robinson, I think, is going to be one of the more eager guys to see Justin Fields on the field, just so he can get a glimpse into what the future in Chicago would look like. Without it, you go in the open market and then you choose somewhere where you can go where you're not catching passes from Bortles and Trubisky and Foles.
You can talk yourself into the Vikings. You can talk yourself into the Bears. I mean, I guess that's why the NFL is the NFL, man.
And you can talk yourself into them more if Aaron Rodgers isn't in Green Bay.
I know it. Dan, thank you so much. That was phenomenal. We kept you way longer than we had you scheduled for. So
partly because I ramble too much.
That was amazing. I mean, we know you've got little ones all over the place there. So I don't know how you're doing it. I offline, I need some advice. I need to get my notepad out and just take as many. I mean, you did give me the packet on the sleep schedule long ago. I still got that somewhere.
Yeah, you need to save that for the newborn. And then I'm just telling you, TD, when you go into two-person man-to-man defense with two of them, you just better be ready, because you can't blow an assignment there. There's no one to back you up when you blow a man-to-man assignment. You're on an island, and if you blow it, it's a touchdown the other way, and now your coach is barking at you, and you got all sorts of problems. So just be ready. You better be watching your Revis highlight tapes too, just to be ready to play that press coverage.
Oh my God. Right now, Gina's got it on lockdown. You're right. I can afford a mess up in coverage. I can, kind of drift and maybe, trust something I see on film and jump, but can't do that now necessarily. What's funny though? I mean, when you were about to have your second kid, like, everybody you run into, it's a game changer. If one more person says it's a game changer, I swear to God, I don't know what I would do, but I would not be very happy. Everybody, like, what do you want me to say? Oh no, I thought it'd get easier. I was just gonna sit around and drink beer and watch basketball every night. Like, it gets harder? What are you talking about here?
You're gonna love it. You're absolutely gonna love it. Your beard is gonna get a lot grayer really quick.
Well, I already lost my hair on top of my head, so I guess something's got to happen. But hey, Dan, thanks so much, brother. Great to see you again. Let's do it in person somehow, some way soon.
Anytime. I owe you both a beer the next time we see each other.
Awesome. Good to see you, man. Send our best to the fam.
You got it.
See ya.
See you, boys.